Fact and follow-up segment tonight. According to a study by professors at UCLA and the University of Missouri, the media in America shows a, quote, strong liberal bias, unquote. Now, one of the authors of the study, Professor Tim Grosclose, said, quote, I suspected that many media outlets would tilt to the left, but I was surprised at just how pronounced the distinctions are, unquote. Despite that data, many media big shots continue to say the press is generally fair and balanced. One of those saying that is Dave Zeke, the executive editor of the Tacoma News Tribune. All right, you're quoted in editor and publisher. Actually, not quoted, but this is how they describe it. First line of the article about you. Dave Zeke is one word for those who claim newspapers are biased, lazy, and out to bring down the country. Bull feathers. Actually, this is when bull feathers isn't what you said or what they said you said. Now, right. You can't possibly be sitting there looking at me telling me that the media doesn't tilt left in this country after study after study after study says it does.
Bill, you know, it depends on what you call the media. I really don't think they do. I'm talking about newspapers, and I see them as pretty mainstream. I'm getting hammered occasionally from the right for being liberal. I'm getting hammered just as much from the left about, you know, they think that we're right-wing. They think we ought to call for President Bush to be impeached.
Crazy people are always going to see, you know, phantoms, and that's the way they are. But I'm just going on the data here. And just the data alone is overwhelmingly in the newspaper industry, almost 3-to-1, liberal editorial pages to conservative. But let's just take a populist story in the news right now. Let's take Ann Coulter, who called John Edwards the F word, and compare the newspaper coverage of this woman to Rosie O'Donnell. This woman, I would submit to you that 90% vilified Ann Coulter, and we have right here a list of the top papers. Rosie O'Donnell, 3. You explain that to me.
Hey, Bill, I don't know who vilified Ann Coulter for what. Are you talking about for what she said about John Edwards?
New York Times, deadly intent, Ann Coulter.
For what she said about John Edwards?
Yeah.
Or for what she said about the 9/11 widows?
No, what she said about John Edwards, taking the latest brouhaha from Coulter, comparing to the latest brouhaha to O'Donnell. There is massive coverage, all of it condemning Coulter, as she should have been. She shouldn't use that word. That's ridiculous. Nothing on Rosie O'Donnell, other than O'Reilly starting a feud with her. It's absurd. It's dishonest, and you should be as angry as I am about it.
It's hard to be angry about what Rosie O'Donnell says. I just, you know, to me, Bill, she's...
Just explain why they go after Coulter and tear her apart and they ignore O'Donnell. That's all I want you to do, Mr. Zek, because maybe I'm missing something here.
Bill, I don't know why anybody goes after Ann Coulter, and I don't know why anybody pays any attention to Rosie O'Donnell.
But you know it exists. You have to if you can read the wire that comes into your own newspaper. Come on.
Bill, what I know is the people who are putting out newspapers, and I think they're mainstream as they can be. I think they still believe in truth, justice, and the American way. I don't think they are biased, but that's my point of view.
But you can't explain to me the difference in coverage of 2 bomb throwers, one far right, one far left. You cannot explain that, sir.
I don't feel a need to explain it. I'm not here to justify either of them.
This is a very stark illustration of the press bias in this country. And that's what it is. Now, you may not think they're important stories, and in the long run they aren't. But it is a vivid illustration of how this country's newspaper industry tilts left, because they don't want to go after O'Donnell because it makes them look bad. Whereas Coulter, they will cut her throat. That's what's happening. And if you're going to tell me that the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, on and on and on are mainstream newspapers, sir, I mean, I'm just stunned. I'm just stunned.
Well, you're welcome to be stunned, Bill, but that's the way I see it. And I think the truth is on my side. You're equating their editorial pages with their news content. They're not the same thing.
I'm telling you that we report on these people every day, and you know, it's amazing. All right, well, we appreciate you coming on, and you're entitled to your point of view. But I would, if I were you, go back to your paper, do a Nexus Lexus search on Coulter and O'Donnell, and maybe you'll see what I'm talking about here, Mr. Zek, because it is probably the biggest example of press bias on a little story I could possibly lay out there. Time now for the most ridiculous item of the day. The media is finally paying attention to the Rosie O'Donnell situation, as we discussed, but in its usual less than forthright way. Instead of making it about the woman's anti-American remarks, the mainstream press is trying to make it into a feud between O'Reilly and O'Donnell. There is no feud. We're simply reporting what's going on. No personal attacks, no agenda. ABC News is even running a poll asking their viewers to pick between the conservative O'Reilly, of course they'd throw that in, and O'Donnell, who is not described as being a liberal. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, ABC's viewers are taking my side in a 2-to-1 margin, which is fine, but it's not the real story. Again, the American media is covering for far-left people here. Okay? As we discussed, that is what they're doing. They vilify far-right people like the aforementioned Ann Coulter, but O'Donnell, it doesn't sound very fair and balanced to me. It's a simple little story, but this is the most vivid illustration I can give you, and it is ridiculous. Finally, tonight's mail, tons of it about Rosie O'Donnell. Segments highly rated by BillO'Reilly.com premium members. Appreciate you guys. Jorge Garza, Naples, Florida. Bill, have you considered that Rosie O'Trader might be echoing the ABC company line? You don't actually believe she's smart enough to know about the Gulf of Tonkin, do you? Someone is putting her up to it. We know Miss O'Donnell takes much of her point of view from far-left websites, sir. In some cases, almost word for word. I don't believe Disney and ABC have an anti-American agenda. They don't have that. Michelle Landon, Jacksonville, North Carolina. Bill, my husband is serving in Iraq. He says the troops are hearing about Rosie's comments. Well, that's what he's fighting for, Michelle, to give people like Miss O'Donnell the freedom to make fools of themselves. Please tell your husband we are very proud of him. Cheryl Smith, Houston. Bill, thank you for exposing Rosie as being anti-American. You are the only person holding her accountable. James Lambert, Mountain Home, Idaho. In my opinion, O'Donnell is anti-government, not anti-American. I disagree, sir. To assert that 9/11 was somehow an inside job, you are accusing Americans of murdering other Americans. That is anti-American stuff all day long. Alex Ross, Great Britain. Bill, why do you talk about patriotism as being a good thing? It is a needless emotion. Jamie Powell, Leeds, England. Hey, Bill. Why do you feel the need to launch personal attacks against people like Rosie O'Donnell? No personal attacks will launch, sir. This is an issues situation. Bob McKinnon, Dunbar, Scotland. My son is serving in Iraq, and he told me he and his troops appreciate that you are exposing Miss O'Donnell, Bill. Well, please tell your son, sir, that I and most other Americans appreciate his service and all the help the UK has given the USA in this very difficult time. April Carroll, Spangdahlem, Germany. Maybe Rosie's next family cruise could be to the Persian Gulf. Great suggestion, April. I'll pass it along.